disruptive.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So, obviously, we know that the Ukraine manufactured war is turning into a complete mess. And by complete mess, it's because their corrupted narrative to try to persuade us is falling apart. Because we know that it is completely manufactured. We know that they're trying to censor out and silence the history leading up to this invasion, to this catastrophic damage that this territory between Russia and Ukraine, using Ukrainians as cannon fodder to manufacture an aggression of United States and NATO allies against Russia, how they want to annex Russia and take down their economy, which turned out to be an absolute failure because Russia now is the strongest economy going right now, that they're branching out to other countries like India and China and Saudi Arabia to create this, basically this new currency, this new occupation that's going to hurt the U.S. economy. It's going to hurt the U.S. empire, and it's killing us inside. And this entire war is nothing more than a proxy. It is nothing more than manufactured. And we knew this from the start, but we have been played time and time again, just like the Iraq war, just like Afghanistan, just like any other proxy war, any other manufactured aggression conflict that we've seen all across the globe. Once again, we have fallen into the trap. And I just want to remind people that we knew about this for a while, that back in 2019, I've shown this many times before, but I want to show this again, that Canadian media even pointed this out, that our mainstream media here in Canada, this is from City News, back in 2019, before we knew about Russia and Ukraine, we knew about this because we were aiding in the building up of this aggression, building up this manufactured ploy to go against Russia. And we knew about this because they did a report on who exactly we're funding, who exactly we're training alongside. And here's what City News reminds us.
We probably don't want to be rubbing shoulders with organized far-right militant groups that have, that are very open about it. I mean, you could go right now and view on YouTube their videos of their trainings, the very forward symbolism. They're not hiding this stuff.
Canadian diplomats and soldiers in Ukraine took an unusual meeting in June of 2018, one that's now coming to light. It was a meeting with one of the paramilitary units raised to fight off the Russian invasion of Ukraine's eastern provinces. One problem: that unit, the Azov Battalion, has been linked to neo-Nazism, and the Canadian military knew.
Велику, могутню і соборну. Слава нації!
So that's just a little tidbit there, that we knew we were purposely funding neo-Nazis that were devastating their own community. They were bombing the Donbass region before Russia even intervened. We knew about this. And we advanced this warfare to the point where Russia stepped in to defend the Donbass region from being bombarded by neo-Nazis that we're aiding. And it's also the United States playing a part into this, and European nations. Anyone that's aligned themselves with NATO, because as we know now, NATO, this alliance that created after World War II, is now nothing more than a bunch of defense contractors looking for business opportunities. That is what this alliance is now about. It's about a business opportunity to liquidate nation after nation and cultivize all the money in the world to create these crises, to create these manufactured wars so that profiteers can laugh about this at the bank. While innocent people, innocent civilians all across the world suffer. That is what this leads to. And that's where it comes down to this. And only few people, only few journalists out there are bothered to question it. And the people that do question it are met with smears. They're met with targets on their back. They get bombarded with McCarthyite smears. They get bombarded by silence and censorship, but they still continue to bring us the facts. They still continue to put boots on the ground because they want to know the context of this war. And if we know the context of this war, we know what this war is about. And they don't want us to know what this war is about, because if we know what the war is about, then we know how to prevent it. We know how to actually create peace. And they don't want peace. They don't want stability. They don't want diplomacy, because it's hard to make a big profit off it. It's easier to manipulate people, establish terrorist groups, to then start civil wars and build aggression in nations so that we can go in and then intervene those nations and overthrow their governments and take their resources. That is what we've been doing for decades. Country after country after country. So that leads to this. This is the UN Council, where they invite on Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal, a terrific journalist, is about to speak on behalf of all the findings of many independent investigators, of many people with actual boots on the ground in Ukraine, seeing firsthand the carnage and what this war really is about. Take a listen to this.
To Mr. Max Blumenthal.
Thank you, and I thank Alex Rubenstein and Wyatt Reed for helping me prepare this address. Wyatt Reed is a journalistic colleague of mine who in October 2022 happened to be in Donetsk when his hotel was shelled by the Ukrainian military with a apparently US-made howitzer, nearly killing him. He was 100 meters away. I'm also here with my friend, the civil rights activist Randy Kretico, who is more recently in Donetsk and witnessed regular HIMARS attacks on civilian targets. I am here not only as a journalist who has spent over 20 years writing books, producing documentaries, and writing articles about conflict and politics from several continents. I'm also here as an American taxpayer who's been dragooned into funding a proxy war that has become a threat to the regional and international stability at the expense of my countrymen and women. Just June 28th, as emergency crews worked to clean up yet another toxic train derailment in the United States, this time on the Montana River, further exposing our nation's chronically underfunded infrastructure and its threats to our health, the Pentagon announced plans to send an additional $500 million worth of military aid to Ukraine. The development came as Ukraine's army enters the third week of a vaunted counteroffensive that CNN describes as, quote, not meeting expectations, and which even Volodymyr Zelensky says is going slower than desired. As Ukraine's military failed to breach Russia's primary defense line, CNN reported on June 12th that Kiev had lost, quote, lost 16 US-made armored vehicles sent to the country. So what did the Pentagon do? It simply passed that bill down to average US taxpayers like myself, charging us another $325 million to replace Ukraine's squandered military stock. There was zero effort to consult the US public's position on the matter, and the vast majority of Americans likely did not even know the exchange took place. This policy that I'm describing to you, which sees Washington prioritize unrestrained funding for a proxy war with a nuclear power in a foreign land while our domestic infrastructure falls apart before our eyes, exposes a disturbing dynamic at the heart of the Ukraine conflict, an international Ponzi scheme that enables Western elites to seize hard-earned wealth from the hands of average US citizens and funnel it into the coffers of a foreign government that even Transparency International ranks as consistently one of the most corrupt in Europe. The US government has yet to conduct an official audit of its funding for Ukraine. The American public has no idea where their tax dollars are going. And that's why this week, we at the Gray Zone published an independent audit of US tax dollar allocation to Ukraine throughout the fiscal years 2022 and 23. Our investigation was led by Heather Kaiser, a former military intelligence officer who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We found, among many bizarre payments, a $4.5 million payment from the US Social Security Administration to the Kiev government. We found $4.5 billion worth of payments from the US Agency for International Development to pay off Ukraine's sovereign debt, much of which is owned by the global investment firm BlackRock. That amounts to $30 taken from every US citizen at a time when 4 in 10 Americans cannot afford a $400 emergency. We found tax dollars earmarked for Ukraine, padding the budgets of a television station in Toronto, a pro-NATO think tank in Poland, and believe it or not, even rural farmers in Kenya. We found tens of millions to private equity firms, including one in the Republic of Georgia, as well as a $1 million payment to a single private entrepreneur in Kiev. Our audit also revealed the Pentagon's $4.5 million contract with a company called Atlantic Diving Supply to provide Ukraine with unspecified explosives equipment. This is a notoriously corrupt company that none other than Tom Tillis, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, previously lambasted for its, quote, history of fraud. Yet once again, Congress has failed to ensure these shady payments and massive arms deals are properly tracked. In fact, much of the military...
But it's definitely confirmed that Russia blew up its own pipeline, right? It's definitely confirmed, even though we sent money to a corrupted diving firm to send diving equipment to the Ukrainian army. It's still definitely Russia's fault. As what Rachel Maddow would say, as what Chris Hayes would say, or Anderson Cooper, you know, those trusted figures in our media landscape that also told you Joe Rogan is a complete buffoon for taking a well-approved drug, a very well-approved common drug that was the top essential drug of the World Health Organization. It was the top essential drugs that they were doing testing for to treat cancer patients, that he was prescribed by a doctor. He's a buffoon. He's a maniac for taking horse dewormer. You know, those trusted officials. They'll still smear this. They'll smear someone like Max Blumenthal, who is bringing you constant facts because he has seen, he has witnessed, he has researched, he has looked at, he has given you the full context of how lucrative this war is. And like he said, people don't realize this. People don't realize what all this money is going towards. And people don't even realize that their money is being taken away to fund this war. This war that no ordinary person on earth ever vouched for. Unless you have a complete toe in BlackRock, or you have investment stocks at Raytheon or Lockheed Martin. Unless you're one of those people, you have no interest in creating proxy wars around the world, making more devastation while you and your family are starving back here at home.
And humanitarian aid shipped to Ukraine has simply vanished. Last year, CBS News quoted the director of a pro-Zelensky nonprofit in Ukraine who reported that only 30% of aid was reaching the front lines. The embezzlement of funds and supplies is at least as troubling as the potential consequences of the illicit transfer and sales of military-grade weapons. Last June, the head of Interpol warned that the massive transfers of arms into Ukraine means, quote, we can expect an influx of weapons in Europe and beyond, and that criminals are now, as we speak, focusing on them. This May, a group of anti-Kremlin Russian exiles outfitted with gear supplied by the Ukrainian government was hailed by Western politicians for carrying out terrorist attacks in Russian territory using American-made Humvees. Although the group, the so-called Russian Volunteer Corps, is led by a man who calls himself the, quote, White King, and includes numerous open admirers of Adolf Hitler, described as neo-Nazis in U.S. mainstream media, the Western weaponization of this militia against Russian forces and Russian civilians has not prompted any outcry from Congress.
It is interesting that we're funding these people to create terrorist acts. And it just just reminds me of when we finally learned about the true institution of how we installed Al-Qaeda and how we got to ISIS. You know, these fundamental terrorist groups that supposedly just happened in the middle of the night, according to mainstream media. We have no awareness of this. We have no idea where they came from. But then we were told by people like Hillary Clinton, who just admitted on camera and to Congress that, hey, we had the Mujahideen. We trained these people. We gave them CIA coordinates. We trained these people with our own weaponry and gave them a bunch of money to go after the Soviet Union. We went and manufactured a terrorist group to go after Russia. It almost seems like a complete play out of that book that we're doing with Ukraine. We just pay these people and give them a bunch of weapons and told them to go fire at a bunch of Russians. For our sake. Doing our dirty work. And ironically, I heard it from his book, actually, which is really fantastic. I'm blanking on the name of the book now. I think it's called The Ministry of Savagery or something like that. I can look it up on my phone here, but I want to continue on with this.
And while the Biden administration has promised that it's keeping tabs on the weapons sent, a State Department cable leaked last December conceded that, quote, kinetic activity and active combat between Ukrainian and Russian forces create an environment in which standard verification measures are sometimes impracticable or impossible. The Biden administration not only knows that it cannot track the weapons it's shipping to Ukraine, it knows that it is escalating a proxy war against the world's largest nuclear power and daring it to respond in kind. We know this.
So I just want to say it's The Management of Savagery. That was one of the books that made me realize how we've been played through these terrorist ops that are occupied by not only military contractors, but the intelligence community plays a factor into this, and people like BlackRock, investment groups, because in order to fight a war on terror, which is what we've been doing for years now, we have to create terror. We have to manufacture terror so we can have the business incentive and opportunity to go fight that terror. So, hence Al-Qaeda, hence ISIS, hence the Azov Battalion, hence Zelensky, hence all these gruesome individuals that we're told to fear and hate, and we need to slaughter people. We helped create that to do our dirty work to slaughter more people so that we can cash in on the blood. And people that are reporting this are constantly being silenced out. Like the Gray Zone that Max Blumenthal co-owns or is an editor at, completely getting bombarded with the intelligence community attacks at them. They did a whole coup attempt. I'm blanking on a friggin' name now. The UK intelligence community did a hit piece on the Gray Zone, trying to take it down, saying that these journalists are, part of the Kremlin puppetry, and they're just spewing Putin propaganda like they don't know anything. They're just spewing out, things they heard from the Kremlin, as they are reporting and looking at where the money is going towards, and then getting getting notes from actual reporters who are on the ground in Ukraine and talking to the Ukrainians. And I knew about this because the first thing I did when I heard that there was a Russian invasion of Ukraine, I went to look at the social media accounts of people in Ukraine, and they told a completely different story than mainstream media. Because the people that are actually on the front lines, that are actually witnessing the war zone, can actually tell you what this war is about. They could tell you purposely that this is not about humanity. This is not about protecting democracy. Their democracy was taken away years ago by people like President Obama, who did a coup on Ukraine. And you were not told about this because you were never told the context of how this attack started. You're not told the history of this, because if you were told the history of Ukraine, just like the history of Afghanistan or any of this, then you would know about this war and how to stop it. But that's cutting into the business opportunities of the military contractors, the intelligence community, and investment firms like BlackRock. And I'm just amazed that people are not more outraged on this. Like, this is like you said, he's a tax-paying citizen on top of being a journalist. And I'm pissed about hearing about this, because all this money, while we're watching our own towns and cities crumble within, and saying that we don't have money to open up the hospitals, we don't have enough money to keep emergency room staff available, we don't have enough money for road repairs. We don't have enough money to keep the trains on track. We don't have enough money to provide you clean air and clean water for your survival. But yet somehow we have an enormous amount of money. We're just printing off millions to the most corrupted nation in Eastern Europe. I don't know how people are not outraged on this. But we're just, indoctrined to not be outraged. But only be outraged about Putin. Only be outraged about Vladimir and Russia and how they're disgusting, filthy people as we're doing nefarious stuff on a regular basis. We champion about our war crimes on a daily basis, but then once Putin decided to defend the Donbass region and go after the Ukrainian Nazis that are taking control of Russian-speaking Ukrainians, then all hell broke loose. That's just the power of propaganda. And here's Aaron Mate, another fantastic journalist who's also been reporting a lot about what's been happening in Ukraine and putting this all together. He reminds us, so CNN, let me just show this. CNN tweeted this out, and it says, exclusive, the war in Ukraine will not be over so long as Crimea is occupied by Russia, Ukrainian President Zelensky told CNN. There's never going to be an end to this war, which is kind of exactly what Julian Assange always told us. He always told us that there was never going to be an end to this war. Just like Afghanistan, there was no end to this war because they don't want an end to a war, especially one that makes the most money. And Aaron Mate says, quoting that tweet, saying, elected to make peace, Zelensky has since adopted the maximalist stance of Ukrainians far right, who threaten his life, and their neocon DC allies who shrugged. As Obama now admits, Crimea has majority Russian support. They can't deny it now. They can't deny that people in Crimea and the Donbass region supporting Russia. They even tried to do an NBC, I think it was Nightly News, try to get a reporter out there to say, like, are you not supportive of Ukraine? Why do you not love Zelensky? And the people there were saying that they love Russia because they were primarily Russian. A recipe for a prolonged and even more disastrous war. That's what it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's a disastrous war. It is a manufactured war to continue to decimate against humanity, against the environment, against people, individuals. Because they could not care less about us. They could not care less about peace. They could not care less about stability, happiness, anything like that. They have to manufacture this aggression because they are capitalizing off of our death and disparity and our blood to keep these wars alive and at foot. And majority of people just don't want this war to begin with. But the people that scream the loudest for war are the same cowards that sit behind the desk and don't even fight their own battles. They send troops. They send our people to go fight their dirty work. And then the people that do survive fighting their dirty work get treated even worse back home. It is just a complete Ponzi scheme. Exactly what Max Blumenthal said. It's a complete Ponzi scheme that military occupation around the world, our imperialist empire, corroding nation after nation, thinking that we're going to bring democracy and humanity, and it's just going to be such great victory for people of Ukraine, great victory for people of Syria, great victory for people of Libya, the country that we now decimate and turn into a sex slave haven and terrorist op. We overthrew Beverly Hills to create a even worse state than before. That's what U.S. intervention has done to these nations. And people are coddling in because they're manufactured aggression against Russia. I don't know how people can not be angered at how far this has gone. and on a global wide scale, because nobody was allowed to question it. No one was allowed to debate this. I don't know how people cannot be upset.